Hello and welcome back. In this video, we are going to create the gig method. Okay, so if I open the Elasticsearch file, we want to use this add data to index. Okay, remember we will first save it to MongoDB because that was how I just thought about implementing it. You can decide you want to remove MongoDB altogether. Okay, you don't want to use MongoDB at all. Okay, now if you decide to use that approach, then you will have to generate your ID, because this ID is the ID created by MongoDB. That is what we are using to index the document. Okay, now for you, if you want to implement it separately, you will only want to use Elasticsearch without MongoDB, then you have to generate your own IDs. Okay, but for us, I'm saving it to MongoDB so that I will be able to use MongoDB. That is how I just decided to implement it. Okay, you might think differently. Probably you might have an approach better than what is being implemented right now. Okay, so I'll add the create method. Okay, so let me copy this. Instead, this is going to be create gig. Okay, and here we're only going to return the normal gig object, and then the param that we're passing in is gig of type iSeller gig. So we are passing the complete gig object. Okay, that is what we're passing here. Now the first thing to do is create the gig. So const created gig of type iSeller gig equal to await, and then let's use our model, gig model dot create. Now the create method, once it creates the object or the document in MongoDB, it will return the new created document. Okay, so that is why we are using create here. And then let me export this. Then the next thing I want to do is, if I go to my gig model, okay, we want to be able to use this transform. Okay, remember that MongoDB creates the underscore ID and we don't need the underscore ID property. Okay, so if we check this, it's going to have the underscore ID. We don't need that because Elasticsearch will throw an error. Underscore ID is a reserved keyword used by Elasticsearch. Okay, so what we need to do is, right here, we are going to call this to JSON. This to JSON is available inside this property we have here. So I'll say if created gig, then what I want to do is const data of type iSeller gig. So this to JSON will be added as a property into the every object once they are returned. Okay, so we have access to this to JSON, and the to JSON will call this transform method. Okay, so it's going to be equal to created gig dot to JSON. Even if you don't, yeah, we can see it right here, and then we call it as a method. Okay, and let me cast this. Okay, so what this means is, remember MongoDB, it has two types of documents. It has the MongoDB document, or rather the Mongoose document right here, because we are using Mongoose. So if you return doc, then you are going to have the Mongoose document, and the Mongoose document has some properties, a lot of properties that we don't need. Okay, and then we have the other type, which is a pure JavaScript JSON object. Okay, so this is a Mongoose object with different Mongoose properties and our own properties. And then the second one is the record that contains the pure JavaScript object notation, which is the pure JSON object. And that is why we are returning, once we call this to JSON, it will return the pure JavaScript JSON object. If you return this, then you are not getting the JSON object, you are getting a Mongoose object. Okay, we don't need the Mongoose object, we only need the JSON object. Okay, so that is why we are returning this record right here. Okay, and here, once we call this to JSON as a method, it will return the iSeller gig object, not the Mongoose object. Okay, so here now inside this object, we are going to have this ID property. We'll have this ID, and then this one will already be deleted. Okay, so this underscore ID will be deleted while we are going to have this ID property. Okay, and then here, what do? We publish the message. Okay, let's go to our, I think, the user service. Let's see what the name of the exchange is. So go to user service, go to queues, go to consumer. Okay, so let's see, I think, where are we consuming the message that comes from the gig service? I think here. Oh, this I just saw an issue. I think this should be updates. This should be update gig. Yeah, I just saw it. It would have been a disaster, because I would have been looking for where this or the bug, and might not have been able to recognize it easily. So this is supposed to be update gig count. So this is the function that will be used to consume. Okay, so we are going to send a message with a type update gig count, and then the exchange name is Jobber Seller Updates, and then the routing key is user seller. Okay, so we'll send the exchange name and the routing key to send the message to this particular queue, and then the type will be called update gig count. Okay, so we want to publish a message, so I'll wait, publish direct message, and then here we need to pass our gig channel. Remember, we already created the gig channel. We pass in the exchange name. So the exchange name is Jobber Seller Updates. We pass in the routing key. Okay, and then we pass in the stringified JSON message. So stringify. This is going to be an object, and then later on, let's just say details sent to user service. Okay, now in this stringify, we are going to pass an object with type. What we want to do with this method is just to update, where is it, right here, update the seller's gig count. Okay, so if the seller creates a gig, we want to update this property, the total gigs. Okay, so if the seller creates the first gig, we increment this value by 1. If the user creates another gig, we increment it by 1 as well. Okay, so that is what we want to do with this message right here. So the type is going to be update gig count. Okay, so right here, and then we pass the gig seller ID. Okay, so we need this gig seller ID, and then also the count. The count is just going to be 1. So gig seller ID is going to be the ID from data. Okay, from data dot seller ID. Okay, and then lastly, the count is going to be 1. Oh, it has to be inside the object. The count is going to be 1 right here. Okay, so this is what we are sending in the message. The type update gig count, we get it here, and then we get the gig seller ID and the count property. Okay, and remember that the exchange is Jobber Seller Updates, and the routing key is user seller. Okay, so this is what we use to publish, and then let us add the message to Elasticsearch. So I'll wait, and I'll call add data to index, and then here it takes in the index, the item, the item ID, and then the document. Okay, so here is going to be gigs, which is the index, and then the ID, which is this ID right here, this ID property. That is what we want to add here. Is going to be created gig dot underscore ID. Created gig, not create gig. You can use created gig dot underscore ID, or you can use data dot ID. Okay, but I will just stick with created gig underscore ID, and then we pass in data. Okay, and here I can just return created gig down here, or I will do it here, return created gig. So this function here just to explain what we've done, we create the gig, and then if the gig is returned, we convert the gig. Okay, we convert the gig from a JSON object to or from the Mongoose object to the normal JSON object with this JSON to JSON method. Okay, and then we publish a message to the user service, and then we add the data to Elasticsearch. Okay, so this is the method we're going to use to create the gig or add a new seller's gig to the index.